programme, 8 billion for the National Health Service, 1.2 billion for mental health, particularly for children, because I think if you address the issue at an early stage, then it's better for everybody. Prevention is much better than cure. So we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we are very much for ensuring that people get a good deal. And one of the things that we've already done, as it happens, is that in Chichester, I heard today that one of my friends, who's a reflexologist, has got a contract with Chichester schools. And she's got it to provide reflexology to Year 5 students. And it's paid for by the pupil premium. That's something that the Liberal Democrats put in place, and, you know, nobody can take that away from us.
Brilliant. Thank you, Hazel. Daniel. I've worked in mental health services for the last 10 years, working with young people, working with people around dual diagnosis, around drugs and alcohol issues. One of the major reasons we see an increase in people quite mental health deteriorating is the treatment of drugs as a criminal justice issue rather than a health issue. People should be helped to recover from drug and alcohol addiction rather than penalised in punitive manners. The interaction of mental health and drugs and alcohol is horrendous and needs to be addressed as a health basis. The best way to do that, as far as I'm concerned, what I believe in, entirely up to you, is through the public sector, through an entirely public NHS, repealing the Health and Social Act, which sets out to privatise the NHS, stop further private finance initiatives, end the sale of NHS assets, and increase the NHS budget by 12 billion a year through transaction tax or Robin Hood tax on the city. Prioritising the well-being of young people, particularly mental health and substance issues, I think the two tend to overlap quite a lot. Needs to be something that's a priority for any company.
Thank you. Tim Cross.
Oh, look, this is just a really in-depth subject, isn't it? I mean, it's just so vast. It's easy to look at someone, they've got a broken leg, you've got a broken leg, put them in a cast, you know, on your way you go. Mental health is a real problem, and I can see that a lot of people, probably the suicide rate has gone up in the last couple of weeks since the election was called, and listening to politicians or budding politicians and trying to get people's votes and stuff like that, it's not to drive anybody around the bend, I would have thought. But I mean, it is a serious issue, and one that needs to be looked at in depth. Funding needs to be put into this big time. I don't understand how you can put a figure on mental health at all. I think we've got to provide the facilities, and we've really got to sort of work out, try and spot the signs, if you like, that if somebody is suffering, we've got to try and help them. And it's very, very easy to hide in the corner, hide at home, you know, put yourself in a box or something like that, and not talk to anybody, because it's a bit of a taboo subject. So we'd like to really get hold of this. And a friend of mine, a friend of my daughter's actually rode the Atlantic in aid of mine, single-handed, and he raised a lot of money for that. And to be honest, that's a good thing, and we should be funding it, big time.
Thank you.
It's a really serious subject, and you don't treat it with levity, as we just heard, because I was the shadow spokesman for mental health in my party for many, many years. And this isn't a party political issue. And Hazel, at Pt2, we've got Norman Lamb, who's the mental health minister at the moment, before Thursday, both in the MPs have done a great job on this. I'm working with them a lot. But I think we have made quite big progress. Something may remember like 14 years ago, there was a song that said bonkers Bruno banged up, and Frank Bruno, everybody's favourite boxer, had had a mental breakdown, and the Sun newspaper made light of it, and it was plastered all over the front pages with that typical Sun headline, and there was a huge revolt amongst Sun readers. They picked the wrong target and they picked the wrong subject. And as a result of that, the Sun completely changed its stance. They paid a lot of money to some mental health charities and took a much more sympathetic and understanding and sensitive view of people with their mental illness. And the fact that you have a mental illness, it is an illness. It just so happens it's a mental illness rather than a heart condition or diabetes or a broken leg. And it should be treated no differently to physical illness. And so we had a stigma problem attached. And I think a turning point was that Frank Bruno issue. We've still got a long, long way to go, but we have to, as a society, treat people with a mental illness as people who need help because they have an illness. They do it so much better than many other continental countries. Now, this government produced a health policy called No Health Without Mental Health that attempted to put on an equal footing physical health and mental health. Now, alas, the amount of funding to go with that had not been sufficient, and so it was announced, and Nick Clegg announced it just a couple of weeks ago, an additional 1.25 billion on mental health and concentrated on young people with mental health conditions. Because we now have 1 in 10 school-age children have some form of a mental illness. And unless you get it early, unless you've got people who can identify it and passport you on to that early treatment, often with talking therapies, cognitive behavioural therapy and others, then it's only going to be a condition that will get worse and require more severe treatment and drugs. And the problem in the past is that we have given the chemical cosh of powerful pills as an alternative to more appropriate treatment for people with mental illness. And it does, Daniel was right, a lot of this is tied up with dual diagnosis of people with substance misuse as well. We need to have a much more responsible way to address alcohol and drugs, starting with better education at PSHE in our schools about it as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, it is a very serious subject, and it's not a partisan subject, and I think all the parties have recognised this and working together in various ways to change the attitude of the nation, if you like. Middle-aged men is the biggest killer of men between 40 and 65. I heard on the radio the other day, I was quite shocked. And I think one of the things about that group is they don't know how to talk to people. Men have got a problem communicating, apparently, and although this lot don't seem to have such a problem, but it is a problem, and you know, these things have to be addressed at source. I know very little about it, I have to say, and you know, I would agree with Daniel and some of the things that Tim said, and I think what we need to do is try and make sure that you know, there's a proper throughput of care in the National Health Service. So you join up mental health service with the NHS and social services, so people aren't going in and out of different options, you know, and have got a proper sort of you know, sequence of care, and they know where they're going with their treatment. I think that's very important. I think our attitude to drugs, I would agree to some degree with Daniel in that we've got a very tabloid-driven mentality politically towards drugs, and I think we need to get people grown up about that and try and work out how, you know, educate people and work out why people want to take drugs in the first place. It's just recreation, I suppose, but there are other people who do it and they get into serious trouble because there's an underlying problem that they have, and that's not been identified.
Thank you. Anybody want to cut in?
So, Tim Houghton, the reality of Northbrook is sort of 4 years ago we had 3 counsellors on site, so we don't have any anymore due to cuts. And we've got young students that are being told by their GP they can't access any counselling for them, talk to somebody at college. They're not accessing any counselling. You've got 16, 17, 18-year-olds I work with every day that cannot talk to anybody because there is nobody to talk to. So this funding isn't getting through, it's not getting to where it needs to be. So how in reality, what you've just said happens doesn't.
Well, there are two points on that. One, it is down to colleges and schools if they see this as a priority as to how they spend that money. And one point Hazel made is actually pupil premium, which was a lived-in policy which we embraced and have widened, is all about being able to provide those additional services, and it may be mental health support services and others to those kids who need that additional support. Yes, but I'm talking about you need to do that as early as possible. Now, for colleges, I mean, I've seen some really good colleges who employ their own social workers or employ their own counsellors, and they see the benefits of that by people being able to get that helps. And it was a good investment. Why it doesn't happen here, why that's been a top of the cuts, I don't know. But what I would say is that if we're putting that additional money into mental health, and the Sussex Partnership Trust, which is the local mental health trust, is one of the better ones in this country, then that money would be better spent placing some of their people in colleges like this, where you've got a greater concentration of people under greater pressures and stresses, perhaps more susceptible to some of these mental health problems. That's what needs to happen. It's not happening at the moment. I entirely acknowledge that. It's a false economy that is not happening, both financially, because it costs much to treat them in the worst conditions, but socially, the impact on that person at a crucial point in their lives as well.
I must come in and say the Sussex Partnership Trust may be hindered by losing their 2 major contracts in competitive tender in the last 12 months. So you may find they're struggling a little bit to meet those needs as well.
Hazel, I think.
Yeah, on a practical solution, I just wondered whether your students could talk to the Worthing Information Shop, because there are counsellors there who give their time free. I'm a governor of Worthing College, and I know that I've managed to get a couple of counsellors for our students. I just wondered if there were places like that, or local surgeries, GP surgeries
GP
sometimes.
surgeries are referring them back to us.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yes.
That I'm getting students coming to me. I've had one this week alone in New Orleans on a Thursday, saying I can't get
GPs
any
are under too much
GP.
pressure to deal with this kind of stuff, and they're not trained to do it either. So they refer
That's
them.
not my expertise, and I've got a student coming to me saying help me because my GP can't.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you
not
for raising
that's
that
not
issue.
regulation.
Just in the interest of time, we've got quite a few questions I'd like to have on you.
When young people turn 18, if they do house school and they go to CAM, as soon as they turn 18, that's full stopped. And if they're not deemed mental enough or mentally ill enough to go to adult services, then they're literally just dropped with a few leaflets and told, here's a leaflet, if you have a problem, call time to talk. So you get all the support up until then.
If we perhaps hear from UKIP hadn't contributed on the previous question for that one.
Sorry, just remind me what...
So when people reach the age of 18, service provision changes,
Yeah,
and
they
then
have to
reassess the needs. How would UKIP manage that transition in terms of support?
Well, I think that, I think that the lady here, close to the front, has hit the nail on the head. You've got to have the you've got to have the backup. The doctors can't do it. They're everyone. It's no good just giving out drugs left, right, and centre. So you've got to provide the staff. You've got to provide the professionally trained staff to do that, and the counsellors to do that. And I don't understand why, if they were here, where they've actually gone now. So I think we would certainly want to be putting the councils back in place, because that has to be the way to do it. That people can go to somebody who's professionally trained and they can talk to that person.
Thank you. I think Amy had a hand up for.
I just wanted to know exactly what you would do to kind of shape up mental health services. As someone who's had to use mental health services in the past, I've had to wait up to 8 weeks to actually speak to somebody. For someone who, it wasn't the case for me, but if someone was suicidal, I was waiting 8 weeks for even an appointment just to speak to someone and have an assessment helpful in any way.
Can I just say on that specifically, because there was an announcement recently of the introduction of target times for mental health treatment as well, because it just didn't apply before. Now, if you wait a certain time, then it's flagged up for an operation or whatever it may be. The same should apply to mental health, will apply to mental health in the future as well, which is fine as long as you've got the services that can then be provided. But if they don't, then it sounds the alarm bells.
That's what I mean. It's so the services are so kind of shoddy. It's really good in some areas, not so good in other areas. You'll wait 2 weeks in one area. I just think it's very sporadic, and it needs to be more of a blanket.
Thank you.
You're saying that it's all important to talk about mental health, but you're just dismissing it and saying it's the school's job and college's job. So, but if you don't do anything in the beginning, nothing's going to happen. So, would you just admit that it's ignorance about mental health and you don't know enough to talk about it?
Why is that ignorance about mental health?
Because you're just dismissing it and putting it as the school's job.
In what way have I dismissed it? So it's just the
No,
school's
you
job?
said it's the school's job to provide mental health.
No, I didn't say that.
Yes,
I said.
you did.
I said.
Okay,
I
so
said.
perhaps we have not quite.
Let me tell you what I have said. It is the autonomy of schools to decide where their priorities are, not just in the academic curriculum as well. And for some schools and colleges, they will decide that they need to focus some of their funds on mental health, counselling, or whatever it may be, and they have the power to do that. Now, if it's a funding problem, you've got some really innovative schools and colleges who link up with local mental health services as well, so that mental health services from the Partnership Trust or whoever it may be will actually have people based part-time or full-time within these colleges as well, because colleges don't have the expertise themselves. We've heard here we're relying on school academic staff or whatever. That's absolutely wrong, which is why I say it's a false economy not to have the school nurses, the counsellors, maybe social workers, depending on the need within a particular college, to link up with those services outside, and absolutely to make sure that where there is a need for CBT, for depression or whatever, that you can get that in a very timely way, because that's the problem in the past. You've had to wait for far too long, the condition worsens, you're given a chemical cosh of drugs by a GP who do not have enough medical. Tim First is absolutely right, and the condition worsens. But I have absolutely admitted we are still not getting it right on mental health in this country. It needs more of the National Health Service funding cake, and it needs to be taken seriously and to happen earlier, and that means at a primary school age in many cases as well, whereas 1 in 10 kids are being affected.
Excuse me, can I just add something? My brother was a manic depressive and he died, but while he was alive he went to Gradenwell in Chichester and now that's just houses. And I think there was something about care in the community. People were told that there was going to be more care in the community, but somewhere like Gradenwell closed down and now it's houses. I mean, I don't know the full details of why that happened, but it seems to me that it's a facility that we had that we no longer have.
But we had terrible institutions. Going back, anybody with a mental illness, even mild mental illness, would be locked up away from sight in an institution. And Gradenwell was a pretty grim place, I have to say as well. Now, there are some people with severe psychotic problems who will need to have secure residential treatment. We don't have enough of that, we need to have more. But there are many, many more people who can be looked after in the community and treated first and foremost as human beings rather than people who need to be institutionalised. And we've got to do that better as well. So it's horses for courses, but as the lady said over here, it is too much of a postcode lottery as to where they do it well and where they don't do it so well.
No.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about counsellors and information shop and so on. But actually, the money that we would want to put in actually would be spent on things like getting out into the community, into CAFs, into youth centres, think therapies and better trained clinicians so that people get that help closer to home, because not everybody actually has got the courage. If you've got a mental health issue, you possibly don't want to go out and talk to somebody about it. But if you can actually do it maybe in your own home, in your local clinic, over the internet, via an app, there are lots of creative ways in which we can improve life for all of us. Because everybody in this room, I'm sure, knows somebody, or even more than one person, that's actually suffered from mental health issues. It affects us all. So we really do need really creative situations which maybe don't cost an awful lot. It just needs for people to talk to each other and pass on messages.
I think it's quite clear that we've got a lot of very empathetic people on the panel who cared about this. I want to move the subject on slightly to...
One quick one.
Very quickly.
I mean, there's mental health, and people, I hope you don't hate this, but there's mental health and there's mental health. So of course you have depression, illness, later to substance later, and then of course you have actual learning disabilities, like autism spectrum, dyslexia. How do you also help those as well? Because mental health,
I think that inherently two subjects.
I mean, not like mental health and illness, not like, I mean, not saying, bad words, slight bit. I mean, it's like, everyone needs help, I get that. I mean, how would you help, you said how you help people who are, how would you help people who need help learning, through education, because we're on the education topic today, aren't we? what I meant. I mean in offence.
Sure, and as I was saying, if we can, I mean, we're hearing that you're all empathetic and you do sort of very much care about health in all its various aspects. Moving on to just one of the questions we had previously from fielding it, and I'm very interested to hear the actual policies of your party. So kind of specifically why and what differentiates you. We get that you're empathetic. But just like context, I was listening to Women's Hour recently, and they highlighted that people of this age group are not just, we don't just care about our own education, our own getting on the housing level, so we care about the wider population as they hear with mental health issues. The question from the floor from previously is, what are your party's policies regarding Britain's ageing population and how the general demographic of this country is changing, how we're sort of structuring society to support ourselves going forward, and possibly touching on health or we can start with something from next person.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? We have got an aging population. More and more people are living longer and longer, and you know, as time goes on, we have to deal with that. The first port of call, of course, is the National Health Service. We do need to make sure that the National Health Service is properly funded. We need to make sure that it is free at the point of use. We need to make sure it is resourced, because a lot of National Health resources go to treating elderly people. One of the things that happens a lot is that, well, the statistic is that old people who go to hospital, they end up, if they're discharged, 70% of them end up back in hospital within 24 hours. The reason for that is because there's no throughput of care. You know, the social services and mental health I mentioned earlier are not joined up. So, you know, when you're discharged from hospital, they have to start all over again with the social services. And what we aim to do is to introduce a much more, joined up service, so that does, you know, that kind of thing is reduced. You know, the readmittance rate is reduced. I think there's a wider issue about pensions as well. We haven't got enough. Most people have not got enough pension provision, and I think this recent piece of legislation allowing people to dip into their pensions at the age of 55 is an absolutely calamitous piece of financial mismanagement, I'm afraid, because well, I don't agree with this. I think we didn't vote for it, and I think it's going to cause immense problems for a lot of people down the line. And a huge number of economists and commentators have said that really most people are going to be tempted to spend that sort of money, you know, from their pension pot, and they're going to be left with nothing as time goes on, and that could be a ticking bomb, you know, waiting to go off. I think also in terms of protecting pensions, we're going to change the way that pensions are rated so that they go up with the retail price index. And you know, that's important. I come across pensioners all the time. You say there's nothing for us. The interest rates are zero. Inflation's nothing, so they're not getting anything on their savings. You know, that's something that we have to address as well. And if you've got an economy that's working for everybody, you know, rather than a few people, then you know, I think that will help to address that situation.
Okay, thank you, Tim.
I keep on going back to the previous question on this. One of the big problems affecting older people is around their mental health and their well-being. You know, one of the prime causes of poor mental health in older people is poverty. And we know one of the contributing factors to poverty and poor mental health is poor housing. We have a lot of people living in the southeast for whom the quality of their housing is going down, with more people living in private rented than ever before, particularly older people. So there needs to be a system of affordable housing, sheltered housing, extra care housing that older people can move into if they so wish, or to gain support and stay in the house they have done their entire life. We believe in a citizen's pension, which will be paid regardless of contributions to national health insurance, we also think that around older people, something that gets missed off quite a lot is around the stigma and isolation of older people can feel they're suffering, particularly those from excluded communities. So one of the fears that I came across the client the other day was an older gay man who was worried having to re-enter the closet, as he called it, when he went into sheltered housing. So we want open, engaged services that are appropriate for everyone. Older people aren't different to us, they're exactly the same, they're the same thing.
Thank you. We keep moving on the line, so Tim Dalton.
And this is an issue that we face more than most parts of the country in Worthing. The number of percentage of people in Worthing who are over the age of 85 is 4.6%. That's the highest in the country. There are almost 25,000 people in my constituency, Worthing and Shoreham, already over the age of 65. And as Tim Parsonage has said, that trend is continuing because we live longer, and the ratio, just to give some statistics, back in 1971, the ratio for every one pensioner, there are 3.6 working people. By 2034, it will be only 2. And it's working people who pay for the ongoing pension for many of our pensions and healthcare. If you're over 85, you require double the value of healthcare as you do as if you are over 75. And despite all of that, Worthing Hospital does an amazing job in terms of looking after its patients. So the average age of patients in Worthing Hospital now, taking out the paediatric and maternity services, is 85. That's the average age. Most people require longer stays and more concentrated care. So this is a huge challenge. And how we fund people's longer retirements, particularly those people ending up having dementia, Alzheimer's, and other longer-term conditions like that, is probably the single biggest demographic challenge that we've got facing us in this country. So we've got to join up much better than we are now, health and social care. We've got to be far more flexible on the way we look after people in the communities. And there's a big contrast here about the way we look after our older generations in this country and the way they do in Mediterranean countries. And you will find in places like Barcelona, when they rebuilt Barcelona, they bought lots of shiny new buildings, but they didn't change the demographic structure. So you still find families living alongside grandfathers and grandmothers' generation, and with younger children as well. And there's far more of a communal looking after those families. One thing that really worries me in this country is a lot of the new developments we have are sort of ghettos of young families or of older people. And that intergenerational mix, which is so important and so beneficial to us, has been gradually whittled away. The intergenerational trust, which I think has also been eroded over the years, is a real worry. So there's a big structural issue we've got to get right. So we need to make sure we've got decent pensions. Pensions need to go up more. We brought in the triple lock. I think Tim, wrong, you're not going to take it back to link it to the RPI, because if we did, the RPI is now 0%. Thank goodness we now link it to average earnings, so that pensioners will get an increase every year that can reflect average earnings if that's higher than inflation as well.
Thank you very much. I'm quite glad that you sort of moved it onto culture then, so I think there's possibly a risk of us pathologising old age. Old age is not a disease.
No.
Yeah. I'd like to say, if we get to the questions, maybe we'll cut back in, but old people don't just mean health and illness issues. The question, I think, is more about society and, as you say, intergenerational support.
It seems to me that the older generation have been left behind. They've paid into the pot all their lives on the basis that they'll be looked after from cradle to grave, and suddenly we find that it's you guys that are going to have to support the pensioners in their older age, when actually the pensioners are actually paid into the pot themselves. They're entitled to get something out of it, and I don't understand why, when it comes to the age that they are, and they need help and they need care, they've suddenly got to pay for it themselves. And now, why should somebody who's paid for their home, paid their taxes, paid their national insurance for 40, 50 years, has to go into a home, they have to sell their home and pay for their own care? To me, this is completely wrong, and it's abhorrent. We should embrace our older people. They're a wealth of knowledge and experience. And if we give them the respect that they deserve, instead of saying they're a bit of a blight on the landscape and they're a bit of a nuisance because they're hanging around, I think to me this is wrong. They have a wealth of experience. We should look to them for knowledge. We should look after them. They deserve it. They've paid in the pot all their lives. You know, and as far as I'm concerned, you know, this business of having to sell their homes or to pay for their own care in their old age is abhorrent. And the fact is that they then die, if they've got any money left over, then it's then taken in death duties as well. I think that's wrong too.
Richard, of course.
Hardly a bit. Hardly.
Well, going last, it's a bit tricky really, because they've virtually said it all, but and I do agree with a lot of what's been said already. Certainly, energy efficiency of buildings, fuel poverty, decent housing, the bed blocking that we all know about. We also know that there's 120 vacancies in our local hospital, which is causing a great deal of stress for the consultants, the nurses, and the other staff. Which means that actually, if you take it to its extreme lengths, that could possibly be impacting on elderly people who are having to stay in hospital because they haven't got anywhere or anyone at home to help them when they get back in. And that doesn't just apply to elderly people, I have to say. Sometimes it applies to people who've got mental health issues too. And so we are trying to deal with these issues locally through the localism bill, through planning, making sure that as many new buildings are energy efficient. But if we tackle the isolation, I think that's really the key for elderly people. They need to get out, they need to have somewhere to go where they can talk and learn skills. Now, at my particular centre that I run, we have an IT hub, and it's actually for elderly people. And they come and they learn how to use the internet and how to use their iPad that their granddaughter or grandson's given them for Christmas. So that's, I think, the way that we need to go. We need to be more intergenerational, get people together and actually work on not just their housing, their food, their energy, but actually on their physical and their social lives.
We literally have about 3 minutes left. So in 30 to 45 seconds, as a final question, would you specifically say why people should vote for your party in particular? We'll go back to you. We'll work down back down.
Well, I think you should vote for the Liberal Democrat Party and myself, because we've listened to what you've said. We will take back some of those things that you are concerned about. And not only will we take it back, but we'll actually act upon it. And so I think an investment in the Liberal Democrats, we have proved that we can stay in government and be a good force. I hope that continues, and we will continue with your support.
If you believe in independence and you believe in running your own affairs, you believe in controlling your borders, and you believe in your future as young people moving through your life, and you don't want to squander £55 million a day giving it to a lot of people over the channel, then the only choice for you is for change. The only choice you have is to vote UKIP.
That's just our seats. Tim Larson.
Look, the first thing is you should vote. And the enthusiasm which people have had here for, you haven't all been talking about sort of what's deemed as young people's actual issues at all. There are mainstream issues we've spoken about, education, health, elder care and everything else. And you need to have your voice by going out and voting whoever you vote for, even if it has to be UKIP. For God's sake, go out and actually But we have had a mainstream discussion, and only one person on this panel has actually talked about immigration and Europe, because what you've raised are the sorts of issues that people are actually interested and concerned about, and what this election is actually about. We will only achieve those things, of which there has been a good deal of consensus, if we have an economy that is working, is expanding, despite what's going on in other economies contracting around the world, and that's why we've got to keep the economy back on track, as we have done under this government. It's not there yet. We've got to keep that stability, otherwise everything we want, there won't be the money to pay for it.
Thank you, Tim. Dennis.
totally agree. Register to vote, go online, do assessments about who you should vote for based on what you believe in, whether or not you've heard anything today, whether or not it makes a difference. I hope it does. If you think about voting Green with the only party who are fundamentally against austerity, the only party who believe in a nationalised NHS, a renationalisation of the railways. Do you believe in renationalisation of the railways?
Yes.
What personally?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, the only party as a whole who believes in it. We're going to get rid of our nuclear weapons. I don't think anyone wants to use them. What's the point of having them? We'll cancel student debt, bring back the EMA, and safeguarding the environment and the future of the planet through the use of renewable energy. I guess you're expecting the Green Party. Do just vote.
Yes. Well, I'd echo everything that Tim and Dan said about voting. It's very important to do. I've got 40 seconds, so I'm going to say one thing. We, the Labour Party, have got a positive vision for this country. We've seen an election campaign which has been dominated by some really quite disgraceful negative campaigning and capped off by some horrendous unfunded promises, which if we came out with a 10 billion unfunded pot of gold from the money tree for the NHS, you can imagine what the media would have done to us in the last week or so. That's not the only unfunded thing. So we've got a positive vision on the NHS, on the economy, on education, on young people. We're going to cut tuition fees by 1/3, and I could go on, but I'm going to do 40 seconds.
Thank you. Well, that point about being able to vote, it's still possible to register to vote if you're actually on the electoral roll yet. There is actually a bureaucratic process that goes behind it, but Student Union Dan is available in his office as usual, and he's able to take people to the vote.
4 days.
Yeah, 4 days left to do that. If you're not, it's worth checking out if you can vote. I'd like to thank Dan for organising this event for us this
Woo!
Because I think Lewis has been a fantastic chair.